Something is breaking behind the scenes, and this time it's not a rumor whispered in tabloids or a passing headline you can ignore. This is internal. This is controlled. This is quiet. Because leaked emails are now suggesting that the very people who built Invictus alongside Harry may already be planning how to remove him without the world noticing until it's too late. And once you see the pattern, once you connect the timing, once you look at what's happening around that $55 million cloud hanging over everything, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a carefully managed exit.
This is now triggering genuine concerns for this man's sanity. I think he's losing it.
If I was Invictus, I would just think, enough. You know, when are we going to focus on what you're actually coming for? And what's going to be interesting is, and mark my words on this, is this now a private visit? Who's funding this visit? Because if they're being funded via that particular charity, one might suggest they're not getting their money's worth.
Prince Harry's total breakdown and break from reality has continued overnight, because not only is he breaking down in tears again during his holiday to Portugal, he has now leaked a private security document to Chris Shipp of Woke ITV, which has been broadcast to the world. And the nutty thing about this is he is literally saying, I'm a terrorist target. Come and attack me. Come and attack my children.
She has such a bad reputation, and she needs that proximity to the royal family so that she can continue to play Meghan, Duchess of Sussex.
I've got a message for Harry and Meghan. No one in Britain gives a rat's backside whether you come or not. You guys are over.
That moment right there, that collapsing feeling, it doesn't just apply to family, it applies to everything Harry is walking into right now. Because while the public is focused on reconciliation, on visits, on appearances, internally, something else is happening entirely. Because emails don't leak by accident. Emails get written when people think no one is watching. And according to what insiders are quietly hinting, those emails aren't emotional, they're strategic. Cold, focused, structured conversations about reputation management, future leadership alignment, and the most dangerous phrase of all, long-term sustainability without dependency on a single figure. That's not support language, that's replacement language. And suddenly, the $55 million question becomes impossible to ignore. Not because of one single transaction, not because of one clear scandal, but because of something much more dangerous: confusion, missing clarity, questions that keep stacking without answers. And in an organization built around veterans, around trust, around purpose, confusion is the one thing you cannot afford. Because when donors start asking questions, when governments start pulling back, when partners start hesitating, the board doesn't react emotionally. They react surgically.
Being all very excited by that. Then suddenly, last Friday into Saturday, they start saying, Harry says, oh, well, I've just found out effectively said, I just found out I'm not going to get armed police protection. That armed police protection I've been fighting in the courts to get for the last 2-3 years. In that case, I'm not going to bring the kids back, and I'm not bringing Meghan back. King, heartbroken, bewildered, distraught.
Look at that contrast. Duty versus absence, presence versus distance. And now apply that same contrast to Invictus. Because while other figures are showing up, grounding themselves, reinforcing stability, Harry's situation feels increasingly unstable. Legal pressure, public scrutiny, financial questions, and now, quietly, internally, leadership concerns. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the emails, the whispers, the quiet discussions, they're not asking, is Harry important? They're asking something far more brutal. Is Harry now a liability? And once that question is asked inside a boardroom, it doesn't go away. It multiplies.
Remember, that is what Diana always wanted. You know, she always wanted the spare to be there in support of the heir. Yet he's turning it all into a nightmare, and what could have actually been a very lovely celebratory dinner.
That line, that's not coincidence, that's a choice, it echoes here too. Because the board has choices. Protect the founder or protect the institution. And history shows over and over again, institutions always choose survival. Especially when money is involved. Especially when scrutiny is growing. Especially when headlines are no longer about impact, but about controversy. And the $55 million figure, whether fully understood or not, has becomes symbolic. It represents everything people are starting to question. Where is it going? How is it managed? Who is accountable? And why does it feel like the answers are getting quieter instead of clearer? That silence, that's what triggered the emails. That's what triggered the conversations. That's what triggered the shift.
What we have with Meghan and Harry is this endless battle of self-pity and victimhood and, oh, it's not going well and all of this sort of stuff, you know. And now Harry, as we know, is still battling on, creating headlines.
Because when the narrative becomes endless battle, when headlines become repetitive, when controversy starts overshadowing purpose, organizations panic. Not publicly, never publicly, but internally, that's where the real decisions are made. And internally, the tone is changing. Not explosive, not dramatic. Controlled, careful words like transition, evolution, new phase. It doesn't sound like removal, it sounds like progress. But when you read between the lines, it's the same outcome. Distance, separation, replacement. And here's the twist nobody wants to say out loud. This isn't happening because of one mistake. It's happening because of accumulation. Every legal fight, every public clash, every unanswered question, every moment where attention shifts away from veterans and onto personal drama. Piece by piece, it builds a case. Not a legal case, a reputational case. And reputational cases don't need proof beyond doubt. They just need enough doubt to make people uncomfortable.
The reason he's been turned down is because Ravik has intel that tells them that he's safe. There's no way that if they had any intelligence that stressed that he was in jeopardy or his wife or children were in jeopardy, there's no way they wouldn't provide that security. It's Harry's ego wanting what his brother has.
Think about that pattern. Decisions being reviewed, claims being questioned, evidence being weighed and quietly dismissed. That same process is now being mirrored internally within Invictus. Review, assess, decide, and what happens if the decision has already been made but not yet announced? Because here's the most dangerous possibility of all that the removal isn't coming, that it's already in motion. That the emails aren't discussing if, they're discussing how. How to do it without backlash, how to do it without damaging the brand, how to do it without making Harry the headline. Because if Harry becomes the headline, the organization loses. So the strategy becomes clear. Make it subtle, make it gradual, make it feel like his decision, even if it isn't. And now the logic starts breaking down publicly, but internally, it's already been resolved. Because once confidence drops, once trust weakens, once stakeholders begin to hesitate, the board doesn't wait for clarity. They act before clarity arrives. That's how institutions survive. And that's why these emails matter so much, because they don't prove the end, they reveal that the end is being planned. And if that's true, then everything Harry is doing right now, every appearance, every statement, every move might not be about strengthening his position. And the deeper you go into this, the more unsettling it becomes. Because what looks like pressure from the outside is starting to feel like isolation from the inside. And that's the moment when power quietly shifts without anyone needing to announce it. Because when things don't add up publicly, it creates a ripple effect privately. People inside the organization begin asking questions they never asked before, not out of disloyalty, but out of necessity. Because once credibility is at risk, everything is at risk. And that's exactly where Invictus finds itself now, caught between protecting its founding figure and protecting the very purpose it was built on. And here's where the emails become even more revealing, because they don't just talk about finances or headlines, they start circling around something far more sensitive. The veterans themselves, the core mission, the reason Invictus exists. And the uncomfortable truth creeping into those conversations is that the spotlight is no longer on them. It's drifting, it's shifting, it's being pulled into a completely different direction. That question, why would someone demand more, push harder, escalate further if everything was stable? That's the same question being asked internally, but framed differently. Why is the narrative becoming heavier? Why is the attention becoming louder? Why does every new development feel like it adds pressure instead of relief? Because once that pattern is noticed, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads from boardrooms to sponsors, from sponsors to partners, from partners to governments. And suddenly the entire structure starts feeling uncertain. And that's when the financial side becomes unavoidable. Not because anyone has proven wrongdoing, but because perception itself becomes the problem. When numbers like $55 million are mentioned alongside confusion, alongside delays, alongside unanswered questions, it creates a narrative that no organization can comfortably carry for long. And And here's the turning point, when perception becomes risk, because risk forces action, not loud action, not dramatic action, quiet action, strategic action, the kind of action that happens in phases, not announcements. First, responsibilities get redistributed, then appearances get adjusted, then representation subtly changes. And before anyone realizes what's happening, the central figure is no longer central. They're just present. And even that starts to fade. That idea of constant headlines, constant pressure, constant conflict, it doesn't just exhaust the public, it exhausts the institution. And when an institution gets tired, it starts looking for stability, predictability, control, things that feel safe, things that don't create daily uncertainty. And right now, stability is not what Harry represents to the board. He represents unpredictability. And unpredictability is something no global organization tied to veterans, governments, and international funding can afford to carry indefinitely, which is why those emails don't sound emotional. They sound resolved, not in tone, but in direction. They're not asking, should we? Anymore, they're exploring what happens next. And the most telling part, they're already discussing alternatives. Names are being floated quietly, not publicly, not officially, but internally the idea of a future without Harry is no longer hypothetical. It's being explored as a real possibility. And once that door opens, it doesn't close again. Because institutions don't unthink replacement. They refine it, they plan it, they execute it when the moment is right. And that moment might be closer than anyone realizes, because everything is aligning at once. Legal pressure building, public opinion shifting, financial questions growing louder, internal conversations becoming more serious, and most importantly, the narrative changing from defense to distance. Not defending him, distancing from him. And that's the clearest sign of all, because when an organization starts creating space between itself and its most recognizable figure, it's not temporary, it's intentional. And the final piece of this puzzle is timing, because if these emails are real, if these conversations are happening now, then whatever decision is coming isn't months away. It's tied to something immediate, an event, a ruling, a public moment where the shift can happen quietly in plain sight, where the focus is somewhere else and the change slips through without resistance. And that's why this feels less like a possibility and more like a countdown. Because if the board has already decided that protecting Invictus means stepping away from Harry, then everything we're seeing right now isn't chaos. It's transition, a controlled, calculated transition designed to protect the institution at all costs, even if that cost is the man who built it. And the question now isn't whether Harry sees it happening. The real question is what happens when he does and realizes there's nothing left to stop.